On this episode of Upon Further Review, tennis players upended down under, another ACC program calls it a season, and part 2 of our interview with ESPN analyst Corey Williams. Welcome to Upon Further Review, your bi-monthly snapshot of COVID in the world of sports. I'm Ty Henry.
And I'm Matt Zemek.
Matt, we're going to have a journalist on from The Age in Australia. The Australian Open has a very fluid situation that has descended into chaos. And we're going to discuss that with him. Anthony Colangelo has been kind enough to join us. But first, let's go ahead and discuss what's taking place. Apparently, there were several charter flights, 15 or 16, and there have been positive tests on a few of them. And as a result, 72 players in Melbourne are in quarantine. And that's aside from Adelaide, which is in the province right next door. They're in quarantine as well, but they're also allowed to have 5 hours of training. And the training schedule has been changed for the players on flights that were infected. According to some of the players, they were told that if there was someone in their section who was infected, then they would have to do a hard quarantine, but not necessarily on the plane. That's what Alize Cornet was saying, and a few others. But this is a very interesting situation. Just shows how when you're dealing with a sport that is so international in scope, we've always said, you and I both, that tennis is a sport where the risk of transmission on the field is among the lowest. You're 80 feet away. You don't touch the official. You don't touch your opponent. You don't touch the referee. And you don't have contact until the end of the match. However, with so many transmission vectors coming from various countries, there can always be complications there.
Well, there are all sorts of complications. And, I think the main thing, just looking at this from a distance in Australia, is that the local culture in Australia and the local governments is miles apart, if oceans apart, really, from, literally and figuratively, from certainly an American point of view and even a French point of view, that, Australia, among various world cultures and world governments, they wouldn't tolerate like five deaths in a day. I mean, never something to be downplayed, but like 5 deaths for them is a tragedy. It's it's like a stop everything else in society. This is horrible. This is awful. We don't have that culture here in the United States. I can't really speak for France, but just the main point being that the urgency and the sense of national alarm in Australia is it's a totally different moral, ethical universe from what we have in the United States. And that's been what's governed a lot of the Victorian government's decisions, other local governments' decisions. And of course, Australia is right next to New Zealand, which, is a zero COVID-19 country now after its lockdown policies. And you see people at New Zealand being able to attend various sporting events, various public events. I mean, that's what the whole world is shooting for. And so when you look at those results over in New Zealand, it just makes a lot of sense in an Australian context to want to get down to zero. And like just if even a handful of people have cases, I mean, that gets everyone's attention down there. And it's really hard to match that with an American situation in which, we're having close to 4,000 people die per day with, hundreds of thousands of cases and over 125,000 current hospitalizations as we record this podcast in the middle of January. So, the complications are there, but I think it's just important as an overview to emphasize just how different the Australian culture is. And what if every major world government had that same attitude toward COVID-19? And of course, it needs to be said that when we talk about lockdowns, that's not a policy which exists in isolation. What I mean by that is lockdowns have to be accompanied by paying people to stay home and providing, the investment in, compensating the public that, hey, if we're going to visit this confinement and lack of physical geographical mobility upon you, we're going to pay you. We're going to compensate you in exchange. And that always has been a bedrock obvious common sense thing to do, but here in America, nope, that doesn't happen because how dare we spend money on the peasantry, and how dare we just make public investments? It's just not the sort of thing which is prevalent in American culture, prevalent in American politics, and how Americans' brains are hardwired. That's not something that corporate media in America have done the past 40 years. That sense of civic participation and everybody benefiting from what the government does, that's very 1965 Medicare, Medicaid. It's not something which has been part of our political or media culture the past 40 to 45 years.
Michael Osterholm of SITRAP said, he made a couple of he had a couple of old saws. One reference he goes back is to the old Repairman show commercial where the repairman says, "You either pay me now or you pay me later. Either you get a tune-up now, or this thing blows out and you're paying $5,000 to fix the vehicle, or the vehicle is an absolute wash." And what we've seen in some other countries, obviously, is they've had multiple waves, but because they got through the first wave and got things under control, they can take measures to tamp down a second wave. And with Australia being historically part of the Commonwealth, they look to Great Britain, which is also a Commonwealth country from which they are descended, and also an island nation. And we see that on an island nation, if you don't do things the right way, it can become all-consuming in quite a hurry, as we saw with the Boris Johnson government, and that's something they don't want in Australia. One thing I am a little bit disconcerted, though, is, and we've seen it here in the United States, is this sort of shaming the working class, turning the working class against each other. I can see what the Australians are thinking, that, hey, these tennis players are complaining and we've had to go through this here. And my thought on that is, look, these people are guest workers. And there's a certain way you treat guests in your country. And I don't think they want to come there and go high-siding and gallivanting and not live like the local populace. However, they're coming there as professionals to perform a service. And I know that as a professional driver myself who fuels trucks, there's certain things I need to do my job properly. And I remember reading from John, I remember seeing a podcast with David Law on the tennis podcast with John Millman. And he says, look, he said a couple months ago, if there's a hard lockdown leading right into a tournament, that's going to be very, very difficult because I'm going to lose 14 days of conditioning. And that's a lot of time to lose conditioning. And in my first day, it's going to take me at least 3 or 4 days, if not a week, to get the feel of the ball again. And to me, it's sort of akin to if in October we said, okay, LeBron James and the rest of you players, we're going to lock you down. No practice, no shoot arounds, no interacting with your with your coaches, no conditioning drills. And you're going to do that for 14 days. And on the 15th day, you're going to play the NBA finals.
Absolutely. And I think what this does, Ty, is it really underscores the point that we don't really have a tennis tour back. Not really. Not truly. And that's not to diminish what might happen at the Australian Open. And of course, people are going to say, oh, does that mean that, Dominic Thiem's US Open doesn't count? Okay, it counts. It matters. And I said back at the time in September, Dominic Thiem should celebrate it. If people want to give an asterisk to him, he doesn't have to care. He doesn't have to, fire back at his critics. He doesn't have to apologize for that tournament that he won. Same with Iga Swiatek at the French Open. She doesn't have to apologize. She was the dominant player at that tournament over the course of 2 weeks, 7 matches. She
beat the French Open champion.
She does not have to defend herself for winning Roland Garros in that weird pandemic situation. All right, but this is not a normal tour. If players have to get to a site over 3 weeks beforehand and have to deal with a 2-week isolation period and all of these circumstances, it's not a normal situation. And so if we can respect and praise the people who are going to win the 2021 Australian Open, but we also don't have to say that, this was just a normal Grand Slam tournament, just like any other. I think there's a way to have one foot in each door and to realize that whoever wins it will have earned it, and yet it will not be like within the run of normal tour play. Having a normal tour back in tennis means you can go to your location on a normal schedule, having normal preparation. Everyone's pretty much on the same footing. We clearly don't have that before the Australian Open. And it's not any kind of, I don't think it's not a controversy to admit that simple truth.
Moving to some other sports, women's basketball at University of Virginia has become the latest victim of the COVID-19 crisis. They have shut down their program for the rest of the year. I will say that we Upon Further Review have made an attempt to contact the coaching staff there through the sports information department. Our request to have an interview was declined, but we will be having someone on pretty soon, and from the media in that area. And from what I'm hearing from folks in the media in that area is they really haven't had contact with the coaching staff in about a month, which is a tad odd, but they're the second program to call it quits. And it's very interesting in that both programs two out of the three programs are in the ACC, which is interesting as well.
Oh, I mean, there are tentacles in various parts of the country. And so, like, anybody who was under the illusion that, that this was just going to go away, or that perhaps, with Christmas, it would be, that would be the end of it, that's not happening. And I think what that points to, Ty, is just that there's so much wishful thinking around this. Let's just get through this milestone or this point on the calendar, and then we can get back to normal. Or if we can just, avoid this particular pothole at this particular point in time, okay, then we'll be good. I mean, look at with the vaccine rollout, let's just get to the vaccine. Well, it's being rolled out, and it's very clear that local and regional governments in the United States were focused on production of the vaccine, but not so much on distribution. And you wonder, you got to stop yourself and wonder, well, wait a minute, what good is producing a vaccine if you don't have a plan to distribute it? And especially if the doses can go bad, or at least not necessarily go bad, but they lose their efficacy. I mean, one discussion point is, if you're not getting the second dose, weeks after the first one, is that going to affect the first vaccine? Now, the science appears, from all that I've gathered, that you don't have to have the second dose exactly 21 days after the first dose, but nevertheless,
But it has to be in that window. It has to be in that window.
one would like to think that if you bothered to mention 21 days as a desirable window in the first place, that you would in fact line up your distribution and your your signups and the facilities, all the parts of the process. You would think that you'd have a plan to knit all of that together. In American jurisdictions across the country, in the various footprints of the various conferences, the various regions of the country, they don't have that plan. So it's just, we're really chasing after this problem instead of having spent all that time in the summer and fall trying to get ahead of it and trying to map out the full infrastructure of that plan. Very few, if any, localities seem to have done that.
What's very downstream from issues that are even more longstanding to the beginning of the pandemic just exposed it. And Chris Hedges spoke of it last week on the Jimmy Dore show when he said, look, we don't have the infrastructure to roll out. Our infrastructure is set up to make money, not to distribute healthcare. As Kyle Kalinske likes to say, look, they do ration healthcare in this country, but they don't ration it based on need. They ration it based on your wallet and your insurance company's willingness to provide coverage for it. But in terms of a large scale rollout of a vaccine, we don't have the infrastructure in place. That's what happens when you have all this corporate consolidation of all these hospitals, and you don't have places in rural areas. And now we have the Biden and Trump administration kind of fighting a PR optics war against each other when they essentially are coming down on the same tactic, which is they're going to go ahead and get rid of all the first doses and not have anything ready for the second dose. And that's not what the science says. And the FDA folks are like, hey, what are you guys doing? You know, the Biden administration was saying the Trump administration wanted to do it and that was wrong. And then now they're saying they're going to have to do it that way. And it's really sort of saddening at this point to see how our system has been exposed at this time.
Absolutely. I mean, you've laid it out that when in a system with the particular motivations and guiding principles, quote unquote principles that our system has, that's not a system that's focused on doing the most good for the most people as soon as possible. This has been, I think, one of the central things that has been exposed in our larger American systems, not just of healthcare, but governance, is that we're so focused on eligibility requirements and means testing and who should qualify and who should be first in line. All those things go away from a mindset of what's the most good we can do as soon as possible to as many as possible. That mindset, do as much as you can, as quickly as you can, to as many as you can. That mindset is connected to universal, broad-based programs and the larger philosophy that every taxpayer pays into a system so that everyone can benefit from that system. But instead, we have these private infrastructures, private benefits, things that are not widely shared but are hoarded by small concentrated groups with outsized influence and more access to the levers of power and to various unelected sources of power. So when you get into the private system and the private orientation that we have so pervasively in America, you're not going to have a larger mindset in governments which says do as much as you can, as quickly as you can, to as many as you can. That fundamental disconnect has been exposed. And so it shows that we need a change of philosophies in this country toward more universal, broad-based programs that everybody shares in. And when you think about that, Ty, I mean, our greatest achievements in American government have been the widely shared broad-based programs such as Medicaid, such as the National Park Service, the various things that all Americans can partake of. Everyone feels a sense of ownership of those things. Everyone feels connected to those things. That's what we should all be about. And the past 40 or 45 years, we have definitely strayed from that model. And now in a pandemic, we're seeing the cost of that.
Moving to the NBA, I believe it was the Denver Nuggets who did they go? Was it the Nuggets who also, in addition to the Sixers having only 6 players about a week ago, the Nuggets had 7? Am I correct?
I have not been able to keep up with every single NBA team. I know that the Sixers are continuing to have issues. They're having postponements. The Dallas Mavericks, they've run into problems. I mean, we've seen a lot more game postponements over the past 7 to 10 days than we had, in the first 2 weeks of the NBA season combined. So we saw the Mavericks with problems. We've seen, a large number of postponements over the past week after a few weeks in which, there were hardly any. This is something that has, spread throughout the league, and it doesn't seem as though the league has been able to put the cap on the bottle at this point. What the things that were talked about with the Washington Wizards a week ago, those issues do not seem to have been addressed. And the central issue in the league seems to have been the issue of visitors being allowed in rooms of players on the road. That seems to be the central issue, and so the league has taken steps, but it still seems as though it's a step or two behind that particular problem, and it just makes you wonder why that wasn't done before the season began, because that's such an obvious thing. I mean, we have to remember that the players didn't like the bubble, but in Orlando, but the bubble was done because you weren't playing a full-length regular season. You had basically a week of practice games, those quote-unquote seeding games, and then the playoffs. So for 2.5 months, okay, fine. but the players didn't want it, that you couldn't do a bubble for the whole length of the season just because the mental fatigue. And remember that Danuel House of the Houston Rockets, he got booted from the Lakers series precisely because he had a visitor in his room in the Orlando bubble and he didn't follow the protocols there. That's why he was out of that series. So that particular notion of both the mental fatigue and not having, well, let's just say companionship away from home, that was an obvious thing that the players, missed. But then for the NBA to not address that in the road visitation plans, that was a big swing and a miss by the NBA.
Well, Matt, when you're talking about visitors in your room and companionship, they're kind of one and the same. It's a time-honored tradition in the NBA. That's part of what road trips are all about, and it's been that way for 40 or 45 years. The NBA announced Sunday afternoon. People laughed at Stephen A. Smith last year, but having had friends who were in the league and having known women, including some in my family, that went to visit players when they came here from other places, right? That's just part of how things happen with adults and men of high status. So I had always suggested that, look, hey, maybe you should expand what is called outside entertainment to something else, right? You can pick a certain amount of, say, Instagram personalities that you want to have on your tracing list, and we will test them. And if they visit you, or if they're in a bubble or together in Chicago, I don't know how that will work, but it would be far too complicated for me to think of. But yeah, when you're not in a bubble, young men are going to do often what young men do. The NBA announced Sunday afternoon that the game between the Philadelphia 76ers, to your point, Matt, and the Oklahoma City Thunder will be postponed due to coronavirus. That is 14 postponements due to contact tracing. The 76ers were left without the minimum of 8 players. Mark Stein tweeted today the league's official announcement of its 14th postponement mandated tonight because Philadelphia has too many players undergoing contact tracing. We talked about the postponement of the schedule or the changing of the pandemic schedule. At what point do you think the NBA is going to have to, because they're starting to look like if they might have taken NFL posture, but they don't have as many people, but they travel a lot more frequently. Do you think there's going to come a point in the next few weeks where they're going to have a time of reckoning, or are they sort of engaging in wishful thinking and crossing their fingers that that their season is going to kind of run into when the vaccine is taking hold, albeit with all the problems that we're having here with the vaccine?
Well, this, building on what we've talked about regarding the NBA and on previous shows, Ty, I think that there's no reason to think that right now, in the current landscape, that the NBA is going to pause its season. I think the NBA is very likely to just go full steam ahead, make its way through, because this is what Major League Baseball did. I mean, remember with baseball, the Marlins and Cardinals both had very long interruptions at the start of their season. So they were 10 to 14 games behind the rest of Major League Baseball in terms of numbers of games played. And so they had to play, several double headers in a short period of time to, come close to making up the full number of games. The NFL, the situation seemed to be really dire when the Ravens were going through their thing in December. So it seems that the season was precarious at that point. A little over a month ago, but they soldiered on and went through it. And I'm not applauding them for it. I'm just saying that's what they in fact did. So I'm thinking that the NBA is likely to do the same thing, and because the NBA is heavily invested in ending the season before the Tokyo Olympics, which B enables the NBA to get back to the October through June calendar that it obviously wants. And we can debate whether it should want that. We've discussed that on our previous show, but that is what the NBA does want to get back to. So I think the NBA is going to try to do everything it realistically can to fit in that season before the Olympics begin. And if the postponements mount, the only thing I think that's going to cause the NBA to reconsider what it's doing is if there are a number of, as if the postponements happen to be between or among teams that are, in the top 3 or 4 seeds, and not playing those games would leave crucial seeding questions at the top of the seeding ladder unresolved. If you're fighting for a 6 seed instead of a 7, that's one thing. But like if you're fighting for the 2 seed in the West, let's say, that means you don't have to face the Lakers until the conference finals. If there's a 2 versus 3 seed fight in the West, and postponed games have a big role in terms of resolving that, that could be a contentious battle. But if it's anything less significant than that, I think the NBA would just toss out those unplayed games, cancel them, not make them up, and then go forward with the playoffs. That's my sense at the moment.
Or a 3 versus 4, which is actually uh, uh, more apt to make you, if you're the 4 seed, you're facing the Lakers in the second round as opposed to the 3 seed.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're correct. You're absolutely right.
Part 2 of our interview with ESPN analyst Corey Williams. Corey, quickly sort of switching gears along these same lines in terms of geographic issues and logistical issues. I keep in touch, I keep in contact with some of the things that are going on in Tucson and in Arizona. I know that California high schools shut down for the entire fall, so that many teams, either on AAU or on high school teams, moved over to Arizona to compete. And I noticed about a month ago or 2 months ago, I believe it was, the University of New Mexico had a couple of teams in Phoenix and in Tucson. Is that sort of geographic, logistical, moving bubble musical chairs going on more frequently? And is it happening in Southern Arizona with teams coming there to stay because of different protocols and quarantines in different states?
I don't really follow AAU basketball at all, to be quite honest with you. I'm more like focusing on the college level and the guys that I
No, I mean
actually have.
University of New Mexico. It was New Mexico's basketball team.
No, I haven't really paid much attention to that. I don't really see a whole lot of that. I mean, obviously, with the NFL, it was big news that the Niners had to finish their season in Arizona. Um, but yeah, it's fallout, and you have a lot of people. And that was the other thing that's been extremely troubling: the millions of people whose income is tied to sports, watching what they go through and what not having a season means to the beat writer, what it means to the cameraman, what it means to the analyst, what it means to the executive. Like, there are so many families and households and mortgages and car notes and everything hinging on college football and college basketball. And, Major League Baseball and the NBA has started, they officially opened last night. Like, there are entire economies at risk. So I commend everybody who's trying to power through this difficult situation.
And speaking of the industry that you work in now, how is the pandemic changing everything? I imagine that when we get on the other side of the pandemic, some things about broadcast are going to be more normal, but some things might not be. I mean, like the ability of technology to remotely produce games. I'm sure that ESPN is going to seek cost savings to a certain degree, but yet ESPN's also going to want the intimacy of having announcers on site. So, there are lots of cross currents, I imagine. How do you see broadcast being different on the other side of the pandemic?
Well, we had, I'll use this phrase jokingly, we had already started getting away with doing remote broadcasts 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was an Arizona Oregon State game from Orlando, and no one knew because we never came on camera. So this has been in the works for like 4 years. They were called Remy's, and when ESPN announced it, everybody's like, "What the heck?" They're like, "Yeah, we're gonna do some Remy broadcasts." So maybe a game that doesn't rate that well, you guys will just do it remote. Go to the studio in Bristol. I'll never forget. I flew to Bristol, Connecticut to do Arizona versus Grand Canyon in Tucson. The game was 20 minutes from my house, and I flew all the way to Bristol, Connecticut to do the game 3 years ago. I'll never forget it. And it was cold, and I was mad, but I got paid. I was happy. But I flew to Bristol on Southwest Airlines to do Grand Canyon at Arizona.
Southwest, a six
Yeah,
foot seven guy flying across the country on Southwest. Oh Lord.
connect in Vegas, Vegas to Hartford. It was the only way to get there. So we've been doing Remy's for a minute. I only expect the trend to continue. You're not going to get away from Jay Billis, courtside Duke versus North Carolina. When the vaccine is out and everything's normal back next fall, the big ticket announcers, you're going to see them because you got to be there to do a great show. You got to be at shoot around. You got to see who's hot. You got to talk to the coach. You got to talk to the kids. You got to, do your work. And then you come to the gym early and you sense the crowd and the electric atmosphere. So when you guys turn that channel on and I'm sitting there saying, hey guys, BYU is fired up. They had a great practice this morning. I really think they're going to come out and stun Gonzaga. I picked that up in the last 24 hours. I didn't have any of that when I got off the plane. That part of college basketball will never change. I think the marquee matchups will always have talent on site. I think some of the lesser matchups, some of the games I used to be on, ESPNU, 10 o'clock tip-off, Portland versus University of San Francisco at 10 p.m., that might be a remote. You never know. But you're absolutely right. It's just a trend that's going to continue.
Can I just jump in with a follow up here? Is technology evolving to the point where you don't have to fly to Bristol for that Grand Canyon game 20 minutes from your house? You can have a remote kit from your house and just do the remote right there.
Yeah, that's kind of where we are this year. And it's not something that we're announcing all over the world, but everyone has the ability to do, not everyone, but a select group of people have the ability to do games from home. The amazing thing, and I talked to a buddy of mine who's been with ESPN since it was founded back in like 78. He's just amazed at what can be done over the internet in terms of production. You've got a master production room in Bristol or in Orlando or in Los Angeles, and you may be doing 6 or 7 sporting events out of that one room. So the trucks and the trailers, you're never going to get away from the hardware, but you don't have to have all those people in a truck right outside the Kale Center. So that's what's changing, and I don't think it's ever going to go back.
Corey, speaking of piggybacking on what you were saying about reps from teams, I want you to put on your college basketball analyst hat here. We have Kentucky at 1-6 right now. Last time I checked, or is it 2-7, Matt? I don't have the exact number, but they had like a 5-game losing streak. Now, typically with a lot of reps, you have with Kentucky with a lot of one and dones. That is offset by having a tremendous amount of talent, but being able to get the reps in the summer and the spring because great teams of great players really can gel pretty quickly. We can often see that on the pickup court as well. But with what's happening now, not being able to get the reps, is this going to be the year where a team like a Loyola Chicago, maybe a team that's no longer really a mid-major program like a Gonzaga, finally breaks through because they have got players that are there 2, 3, 4 years who have that muscle memory as a team to be able to play together, even not having the reps?
Yeah, I think, and I won't discredit any of the top programs, but I will say the trend I've seen in the past 8 to 10 years is that the Blue Bloods coaches are coaching year round because their best players are always freshmen. So you've got to coach and develop a kid. And if he's making the same mistakes in December that he was making in November, you got to get rid of him by January when conference play starts. Then by February, you need him in his groove because March is right around the corner and you got to make your tournament run. So you would literally see blue blood coaches coaching technique and fundamentals during games. And it used to blow my mind, but I had to remind myself, he's only got 7 or 8 months with this kid. And you've got to teach during the game. Where my era was so different, when you got all Americans on the court and all Americans on the bench, you just move them in and out of the game like chess pieces. If you don't do it, someone else will. Those days are long gone. So I think you're going to see, especially this year with COVID and the reduced court time and the reduced togetherness and reps, you're going to see these very, very young teams struggle. And you are certainly going to see I don't think a blue blood, other than the Zags, is a favorite to cut down the Nets and win the national title. I think Gonzaga has the best chance. If it's not them, it probably won't be any of the names we're super familiar with, because that tournament is such a grind. And you hit the nail on the head. You've got to have some kids who have been there before to get that done. You got to win 6 games in a row. And
you got to have the Gene Edgersons and those type of cats.
Yeah, you got to have some guys that play at a different level. And I don't ever say this on air, and I'll share it with you guys. It's not hard for a good coach to confuse a freshman. I don't care who the freshman is. It can be Zion Williamson. It doesn't matter. A good coach can stymie a freshman. I've seen coaches do this to each other all the time. The kid still goes to the league, but he gets shut down for a game or two, or maybe they don't go that far in the tournament because you run up against a coach. It's like, I'm not going to let this guy do whatever he needs to do. Now, once again, dating myself to the 90s, when most of the guys were seniors, if a guy's got a killer senior, there's nothing you can do. He's seen it all. He's seen double teams. He's seen boxing ones. He's seen gimmick defenses. He runs the offense. He's super strong. He's got a great shot. He makes his free throws. He doesn't turn them. All those things come with a kid staying for 3 or 4 years. So when a coach comes up against a talented senior, he's out of luck, because it's hard to confuse a kid who's played college basketball for 40 months. But a freshman who just showed up on campus and already has 1 foot in the NBA and half his brain is already in the NBA, doesn't take much to get him to have an off game.
The first name that comes to mind, Corey, from your era was Brevin Knight.
Yeah, see, I'm not going to name names because I have a career.
Yeah, no, I mean that he was that guy, man. Just like I was in the stands. He gave us fits, man. He was there year after year after year, man.
and as a coach, you just coach around that kid. I'll never forget when we played Jason Kidd at Cal. Coach Olson was one of the greatest tacticians. He had a strategy for Ed O'Bannon. He had a strategy for Tyus Edney. He had a strategy for every superstar player in the Pac-10. When we played Jason Kidd, he said, just stay in front of him. And we looked at him like, that's it? He's like, if you try to speed him up, he's going to drive the lane and score. If you sit back, he's going to pick you apart. If you trap him, they're going to make open. Like, he's on a different level. There's no monkey wrench I can throw at Jason Kidd that's going to knock him off his game. And that's the only, and I mean the only time Coach O was like, leave that hornet's nest alone. Just play. Don't let Jason hurt you too bad. We're not going to do anything special because that will just cause problems. He had a lot of respect. And then Jason Kidd earned it. I mean, he was literally that good. So, when you look at these coaches and you look at them trying to win with freshmen, I tip my hat to them because that's a tall order. It really is.
That leads me into this question, and it's something that fans say a lot about blue blood basketball coaches. Not so much football, because football is such a logistical challenge, but it really happens a lot in basketball since it's just 5-on-5. And that is, well, he just rolls the ball out and he just wins because of his talent. So I would imagine that is a complete myth, or are there a few coaches who really deserve that label, and perhaps which coaches are most unfairly slapped with that label in college basketball, in your opinion?
I will tell you that when college fans say he just rolls the ball out there, they're not wrong. They are not wrong. There are coaches who absolutely do that. Now, I will say this at the same time. They do it because their hands are tied, and that's what they have to do. And it sounds weird, but the way recruiting in AAU has influenced college basketball, If you have a named player and you don't give him the keys to the car, you won't ever get another one. It's just that simple. So watching coaches who have this encyclopedia of knowledge, watching a coach let a kid stay out there after 5 bad plays, knowing that he probably should come out the game, that coach, and I talk to these guys off the record, that's probably the most difficult part of coaching in this modern era is you can't coach them too hard because there's a scarcity of talent. You're looking at over 800 transfers a year. I think AAU basketball is marginalizing the Division I college basketball coach. He's less and less important. It's more, can you recruit a kid who wants to play with another kid, and now his friends come, and now you've got this super trio of kids, and you got a chance to win a national title. That's what it's about now. It's not necessarily about can a coach develop you and make your game better, and can you get something from it. So when fans say that they're just rolling the ball out, I would agree, but I will defend those coaches tooth and nail. They know basketball. And their challenge is how much can I lean on a kid without breaking him? How much can I coach a kid without losing him mentally? I've seen kids check out on coaches during the middle of the season. And I'm at shoot around and I'm like, what's wrong with him? And the coaches will tell me, oh, he doesn't care. He's done. He's got his head in the clouds. He's ready for the NFL or the NBA. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He's like, no, he thinks he's going pro. I said, he thinks he's going to the league? And I'm not going to name names, so I can't do that. But there are so many coaches who just shrug their shoulders like, he's a talented kid. If we could get him to, quote unquote, buy in, which is the huge phrase that everybody uses. But that's the struggle of the Division I college coach. They're not given or granted that leverage to really exercise their craft the way they used to. You can't stockpile talent, and you got 800 or 900 kids transferring every year. And you're judged by how good you did last year. So if I've got 2 superstar freshmen and I just let them go and hope that gets me a 20-win season, the fan that notices that isn't wrong. They're not wrong, but they've also got to look a layer deeper, and say, are you trying to say the coach doesn't know anything, or is the coach trying to deliver the goods given the situation? That's what I see when I look at it.
That does it for this episode of Upon Further Review. And until next time, learn more, share more, think more, care more.